So I'm going to begin this with the opening verse from one of the book of Maccabees. So Alexander from the land of Kittim defeated Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, whom he succeeded as ruler, as the first of Hellas, the Greeks. That's Hellas is the ancient word for Greece. He undertook campaigns, gained possession of many fortresses, and put the local kings to death. He advanced to the ends of the earth, plundering nation after nation. The earth grew silent before him, and his ambitious heart swelled with pride. That's the opening verse. And it begins, you recognise the word Darius there. I'm not sure. The history is pretty involved. But the last time we see Israel in the Bible is most of them are in exile in Babylon. And some of them have come back to Jerusalem to rebuild it in the days of Nehemiah and Ezra. And we've had a long gap. But this is what happens in the gap. This is almost like the missing piece of the puzzle before Yeshua arrives on the scene in about 500 years later or whenever it was. And during that time, the Greek Empire has completely taken over. Alexander the Great. Correct me if I'm wrong, historians in here. And what was that? After the Greek Empire, Alexander the Great died, there was succession. And then the kingdom was taken over by some people. Maybe his sons, is it? I can't remember.
They split the kingdom.
So the kingdom was split, and there's Seleucid Empire was one of the splits. There's another one, polemic, and there's another couple. But we're just going to focus on the Seleucid Empire at the moment. And as you can see, it swallowed up Israel. Hey, there's a guy. His name is Antiochus. Generations later, this guy called Antiochus appears. Well, they're all called Antiochus. Antiochus the first, second, third. This is Antiochus Epiphanes. And I'll read from the book of Maccabees again. From these there grew a wicked offshoot. Yeah. Antiochus Epiphanes, son of King Antiochus. Another Antiochus. Once a hostage in Rome, he became king in the 107th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes, the word Epiphanes, we have epiphany in English. It means God manifest. So he did fancy himself. But he was also called Antiochus Epimanes, which means madman, which that's what they thought he was. And he came and took over through long story short, Israel, Jerusalem, and it kind of started off okay. I'll just read from Maccabees again. It was then that there emerged from Israel a set of renegades who led many people astray. Come, they said, let us ally ourselves with the Gentiles surrounding us. For since we separated ourselves from them, many misfortunes have overtaken us. And a number of the people eagerly approached the king, who authorized them to practice the Gentiles' observances. So they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem, such as the Gentiles have. What was going on with the Greeks was this thing called Hellenism. Hellenism is not a big word, it's just that was the ancient name for Greece. Hellas, the ancient name for Greece. Hellenism was everyone becoming Greek, everyone having the mindset of the Greeks. And we still have some of that mindset today. There was an underlying thing with the Greeks, with this Hellenism thing. It was like a mission to cultural diffusion. So it was from what I understand, it's a better way of conquering nations to make them happy, to be everyone's accepted. Oh, try that, try this. Oh yeah, that looks good. Yeah, we accept that. We accept everything here. It's all good. It's all okay. But there were some quite crazy ideas that were coming from Greece back then. There was the city life, the polis was a big thing. If you go to the next slide. This was the centre of Greek city-states. It looks amazing. It looks really nice. A little bit like London town centre. It's very, very kind of... This was the centre for trade, and you could actually become a citizen of a Greek city, and it would give you advantage. There were loads of philosophical ideas being shared. There was literature, arts, science. It was like... I'd say Christmas for the Jews. They'd stumbled upon something that was just amazing. And the word assimilation started being spoken about. Assimilation is basically cultural diffusion. It's a blurring of the lines between who you are and who these Greeks are. Assimilation into this culture. I mean, who wouldn't? And as we read in the book of Maccabees, if you go to the next slide, this is the Alexandria Library. Obviously, that's not a painting of it, but that's in there was the most amazing library of all literature from around the world. They had a mission to get all the writings from all around the world and stock this library with it, including the Torah, including the Bible, which they didn't understand Hebrew, so they wanted to translate it into Greek. So that's where we get the Septuagint. And a lot of the New Testament is quotes from the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Bible. And they stocked them in those shelves as well. So it was a very much everything is equal, everything is amazing, everything is learning new ideas. It was a real time of humanity was growing. It sounds all good, doesn't it? Next, we have a gymnasium in Jerusalem. Sorry if that offends you. But that was another Greek thing. Body beautiful. They loved their bodies. They loved muscles. A bit like today. A lot of this is a lot like today. We haven't got to this stage yet. I'm getting rid of my membership when they start forcing that. But this became a problem for the Jews, especially because there's a certain thing that they had on their body that others in the Greek Empire wouldn't have done, other people around. They were circumcised. And in a gymnasium, you're going to see that. And that's a problem. So I don't know how, it says in the book of Maccabees again, that a lot of men decided they wanted to uncircumcise themselves. How do you do that? How do you put it back on once it's gone? Surgery, sorry, I see someone holding their ears. But it just underlines the fact that they weren't happy with their identity, who they were. They wanted to throw away the old and embrace the new, embrace the progression of society, and embrace new ideas. But it was out of balance. And it ended up with not just their identity physically being done away with or thrown away, but the Torah as well. Not just the Torah, but their identity as a set-apart, different people. Deuteronomy 14 verse 2 says, "You have been set apart as holy to the Lord your God, and he has chosen you from all the nations of the earth to be his own special treasure." And in many places, in Isaiah 1, it says, "I will make you as a light for the nations, that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth." That word salvation in Hebrew is Yeshua. They needed to be set apart. They needed to be lights for the nations so that God's salvation would be able to reach to the end of the earth. And that's what they weren't understanding in this, the light of amazing culture and amazing new ideas. They forgot that they were the light of God. And to be the light, you need to be separate. You need to be shining. You need to have something in you that is showing the world that you're different. So we have two extremes. We got the traditional, this is what it was growing and growing and growing. There was the new Hellenistic Jews who had formed a new type of Judaism based on the idea of Hellenism and adjusted their religion, adjusted their lives to line up with that. And then you have the more traditional Jews who were really worried about Judaism losing its identity and it being completely lost, Torah thrown out the window. So at the beginning, everything seemed kind of okay. Maybe go back one, Mum. I think it's doing an auto thing. So in the beginning, it was fine. It wasn't amazing. If your country's taken over by an empire, it's got some pain attached to it, but it opened up some new ideas, and it was okay. But there came a point where an enforcement started to happen, and this is where Maccabees, this is where Hanukkah comes in. So now it's getting a little bit more forceful. You're not allowed to be Jews. You're not allowed to be different. You have to do what the Greeks do. And obviously, with the Greeks, with all this amazing knowledge and everything, came their pantheon. They had 12 main gods that they worshipped to, the Olympians, whatever that was. It didn't line up with Torah. It didn't line up with what God wanted them to be. So I'm going to just go very quickly through the story, and then we can get to some thoughts for us, because this does apply to us. So what happened at some point? Antiochus wanted to go and conquer Egypt. That he'd had some business down there before, and he got to the place he could have conquered it. But Rome at this point was quite influential on the world stage. Rome warned him not to. There's a story where he came out and they drew a line around him in the sand and said, decide whether you're going to carry on conquering Egypt, but when you step out of that circle, you need to have made your decision. And he decided not to, because he didn't want to kind of stir Rome up. So maybe he's a little bit annoyed about that. And somehow, so then he ended up, okay, I'm going to have to go home. But on the way home, in Jerusalem, by now Antiochus wasn't as popular. There's some fake news that happened. There's a rumour that Antiochus had died in Egypt, and that caused a spark. And modern historians are saying that in Jerusalem, in Israel and Jerusalem, that divide between the Hellenistic Jews and the traditional Jews was really a gaping chasm, and there was a lot of pent-up anger. So that was the spark that caused a revolt by the people there, the traditional Jews, against Hellenism. They'd had enough. But Antiochus wasn't dead. So he goes back via Jerusalem and he completely massacres the city. He takes Jerusalem by force, massacring the inhabitants, taking the temple. He just went all the way, completely the rich has already gone from the temple by then. That's a long story short. But he killed people. He caused people to be taken off into exile again. And this is underneath the surface. He realised that the Jewish identity was the reason why they are not going to fall in line. They're going to continually revolt until their identity is completely wiped out. So he imposed things onto them that were identity killing. So no prayer, that's a big one. Prayer was central, especially with the temple, with the sacrifices still going on there. No Sabbath, that's another big one. This is central to Judaism even today. No Torah, no Bible. You got rid of all the Bibles. No circumcision. We talked about circumcision. Circumcision with that sign that you are in the covenant of Abraham. You are in Israel. You are part of the nation. No circumcision when your son's born. No kosher food. Well, the food laws. And then pagan sacrifices were mandatory. And Zeus was sacrificed to. And funny enough, the image of Zeus happened to be the face of Antiochus himself. And this is unusual in antiquity. This usually would make rebellions happen all around the world. It's suicidal. But he realised that the identity of the Jews was so strong that it was dangerous. So there's this guy called Mattathias, who is a priest in Modain, which is there's Jerusalem, Modain, not far from Jerusalem. What happened is a lot of the people who were traditional Jews went off into the countries and settled in villages, and some in the desert, to kind of get away from Jerusalem. And so when this happened, Antiochus sent people into the towns and surrounding villages to enforce these laws as well. They couldn't get away from it. Just because you're not in Jerusalem, we're coming to get you. I'm just going to read from Maccabees again. About then, Matthias, son of John, son of Simeon, a priest of the line of Joarib, left Jerusalem and settled in Modain. About then, meaning when it was getting really bad, Hellenism. Jerusalem, her temple, and I'm skipping a few verses, had become like someone of no repute. The vessels that were her glory had been carried off as booty. Her babies had been slaughtered in her streets, her young men by the enemy's sword. See how the holy place, our beauty, our glory, is now laid waste. See how the Gentiles have profaned it. What have we left to live for? The king commissioners who were enforcing the apostasy came to the town of Modain for sacrifices. The king's commissioners who were enforcing the apostasy came to the town of Modain for the sacrifices to Zeus. Many Israelites gathered round them, but Matthias and his sons drew apart. They said to him, "You're a respected leader, a great man in this town. Be the first to step forward and conform. You and your sons shall be reckoned among the friends of the king, honoured with gold and silver and many presents." Raising his voice, Matthias retorted, "Even if every nation living in the king's dominion obeys him, I, my sons and my brothers will still follow the covenant of our ancestors. May heaven preserve us from forsaking the law and its observances." Then Matthias, if you go to the next picture, Mum, then Matthias went through the town shouting at the top of his voice, "Let everyone who has any zeal for the law and takes his stand on the covenant come out and follow me." And this picture is representing the time when Matthias actually killed one of the Jews who bowed down to the orders of the king to come and sacrifice to Zeus on an altar. He killed him, and he also killed the officials as well, which didn't go down very well. After Matthias dies, Judas, his middle son, becomes the leader, and his name is Judas Maccabees. That's where we get Maccabees from. It means hammer. That's how we can interpret it. Because everything he did was a hammer blow to the Greeks. And he said it on his deathbed, "This is the time for my children, for you to have a burning zeal for the law, for the Torah, and give your lives for the covenant of our ancestors." And then he goes to list some people who had zeal. Phinehas, our father, in return for his burning zeal, received the covenant of everlasting priesthood. Know that generation after generation, no one who hopes in him will be overcome. My children, be resolute and courageous for the law, for it will bring you glory. And we read law in English, and we maybe got some bad ideas about law. It's Torah. Torah is instructions of God. Torah is the ways of God, the ways of their ancestors. And they will bring you glory, he says. Judas Maccabee led a rebellion which took 3.5 years. And eventually, if you go to the next slide, Mum, it culminated in this. They retook the temple and they relit the menorah. But there's a miracle that happened, apparently. It's not written in Maccabees, it's actually in the Talmud. It's a commentary on the time period. And there's reasons why maybe that wasn't written. There's some political reasons. But it says that one vessel full of oil, there's a special oil that needed to be lit for the lamps. It's the most sacred light in all of Israel. It needed to be made from the best oil. And there was only one that was kind of rubber stamped by the high priest from before that they could find that hadn't been defiled. All the others had been either broken into or become defiled. There's only one, and it would only last for 1 day, apparently. But apparently, it lasted for 8 days. A miracle happened there. And at this point, Simon was the new lead. The older brother took over when Maccabee died, Judas Maccabee. And it was the first time Jerusalem was recognised as a free state since the exile, which is amazing. They completely shook off all the chains of the empire. This was at the junction point between Greece and Rome, apparently, and And from what I've been reading, they literally emptied the money of Greece. They were spending so much money trying to come against these Maccabees. They just ran out of resources. They were just so hard.